at what we mean by infinite energy and free energy. What some people have said about free energy devices. We're going to look at cold fusion. This is a really big part of this presentation because it really is a big indication of the state of things in terms of the energy. Cold fusion is a real flashpoint in this whole scheme of things. We're going to look at some of the Tesla reproductions by Paulsness, which in itself is not free energy as such, but it's an indication of some of the technology that's been suppressed. We're going to touch on Wilhelm Reich, who I've mentioned before, because he comes into free energy technology as well. We're going to look at John Hutchison's experiments and his batteries that he's created. Water-powered vehicles, and I was just talking to Rob just before we started about one of the people that's been here and tried to get water-powered vehicles made in reality. We're going to look at Bedini motors, which I don't think that many people will have heard of. Magnetic motor reproduction, which is an interesting little story. And then another big thing that I've got in here, which I found a bit more about when I was doing this presentation, is Bruce Stepana and the end machine. I've got a booklet about that because I thought it was so important. I printed out some booklets. I've got about 4 or 5 copies. We're going to look at the death of inventors. We're going to look at Dr. Stephen Greer and his energy projects, who I've followed for the last few years. So that's an interesting story that people need to know about. And then we're also going to look at the weaponization of this technology, which is one of the main reasons why we haven't got access to it, because it's already been weaponized. And I'm going to remind you about that for those that have been here before. And then that plays into why we've not got widespread use of this free energy technology. Okay, so let's start off with some common statements that you hear from authority figures that Rob referred to in his introduction. Free energy is impossible. There is no such thing as a free lunch. Free energy is impossible because it breaks the first law of thermodynamics. Energy can neither be created nor destroyed. Heat and mechanical work being mutually convertible. That's what you'll see in the textbooks. So you can't get energy from nowhere. You can't start off with a system and get energy out of it that was more than was apparent there in the first place. If someone had created a free energy device, they'd be a billionaire. Okay. So now you know that free energy doesn't exist, because if you create a free energy device, you don't become a billionaire. So therefore your free energy device is no good. Because if it was any good, you'd be a billionaire. Some of you know here know that's not true. Perpetual motion is impossible. There's this confusion between perpetual motion and free energy. It's kind of like one of these automatic statements that come out. No one has demonstrated a device which produces more energy than is fed into it in some form. I dispute that, and I think you're going to see a lot of disputation of that in what I've got for you tonight. Now here's one simple example, which I came across again. I've not heard of this before doing this presentation. Michael Faraday was a Fellow of the Royal Society, 1791 to 1867. That was his birth and death. He was an English chemist and physicist who studied the magnetic field around a conductor carrying a DC electric current, and he established the basis for the magnetic field concept in physics. He discovered electromagnetic induction, diamagnetism, and the laws of electrolysis. Michael Faraday did an experiment on December 26, 1831, which he co-rotated a magnet with a copper disc, I think I should say copper disc rather than copper, and a measured current output. He measured the current output. Even though he had done that experiment, his own law of induction tended to ignore that fact. Known for over 150 years, the operation of a Faraday homopolar generator whose current generation could not be properly explained. It was just left to one side. The world later embraced Faraday's two-piece induction generator, whose drawbacks include mechanical friction and electrical losses. So in other words, the modern electric motor ignores this homopolar generator concept. It was like they took the wrong road in physics all those years ago. I'm going to come back to this in the form of the end machine later on. Now Tesla, again, he comes up a lot. I haven't got a lot about Tesla in this presentation, hardly anything. This is about it. One day, man will connect his apparatus to the very wheelwork of the universe, and the very forces that motivate the planets and their orbits and cause them to rotate will rotate his own machinery. That's what he was saying. Tesla's experiments showed that there was a radiant energy field present everywhere. It just needed the right equipment to extract this energy, and sometimes you needed to put energy into a system to make the radiant energy visible. So you need to put energy in before you get the energy out. Now, of course, Niagara Falls famously used generators which were originally designed by Tesla. So he knew what he was doing. It was one of the first operational hydroelectric stations in the world. I forget the date it came into service. But even when they set that system up, they noticed some unusual effects in the energy that came out of it. Now, before we come to more modern times, I'm not going to focus so much on the historical stuff, but I just wanted to mention a few devices that I've come across. There's loads of these. When you go and look for them, again, it's like a lot of this stuff. You start looking, and you just like, it's like drinking from a fire hose. There's just so much stuff. James Griggs, 1980s, the hydrosonic pump. This was a simple system whereby you pump water through a rotating flywheel, you rotate this thing at very high speed, it appears to heat the water, it does heat the water, and the energy that you can extract from the heated water seems to be greater than it should be. It works out that it's 125% efficient.
Sonoluminescence.
And that's another thing. This isn't sonoluminescence, but not the hydrosonic pump, that's a different. It may be to do with cavitation in this as well, so the underlying principle is the same, there's no light involved in the hydrosonic pump. Magnetic sink circuits, this is one thing that Wilbert Smith designed to extract energy from the Earth's magnetic field, only in a small amount. And then we've got Schauberger's experiments in the 1930s and 40s, another water-powered device which rotated water at very high speed. And the Nazi regime invested money in this. So, you can go and check that out if you wish. Just to show you that I've looked at some of these terms, these are some of the scientific terms that come up. For example, coefficient of performance. One of these terms is sometimes bandied around. What does it mean? Well, it's basically used to define heat pump efficiency. And this is just something that you can look at if you're into the science of this. It stands for coefficient of performance, and basically T1 is the condensing temperature, T2 is the evaporating temperature, and this is how you work out the efficiency. And then it is normal to express this coefficient as the ratio of energy output to energy input, rather than use temperatures as shown below. So that's another way of expressing this. Typically, a heat pump operating from a source temperature of 5 degrees centigrade and designed for heating only would have a coefficient of performance of about 3, whereas a reversible machine for the same conditions would have a coefficient of performance of about 2.6. So that's what the scientists will tend to look at and gauge these devices based on this coefficient of performance. Okay, right, well I've just got a very short clip here, I think I'm going to play, by this guy, Nick Cook, who's the former editor of James Defence Weekly.
In my experience, there are people who are now producing small but usable amounts of energy from the vacuum of space.
Give me some examples. What have you seen?
Well, there is an individual who doesn't want to step out of the limelight quite yet, but who is in America and who has developed a device which, to my satisfaction, is producing small but usable amounts of energy from.
Tell me everything you know about the device. I mean, did you get to see it? Did you get a demonstration? Did you get to examine the device? Tell me what you know.
I haven't seen the device yet, but we have talked about it at length. I have sent emissaries to go and look at people I know who are scientists to go and look at the device, and they came back to me and said, this is real. It is producing usable amounts of energy, and so at the earliest opportunity, I'm going to go out and see this guy. I mean, unfortunately, there is, there have been huge demands on my time since publication of the book, and a lot of people stepped forward making these claims. So I have to be very careful about, if
all
I
right, well, you've got to be careful.
Everyone
you've got to be careful about the whole thing, Nick. But tell me if you know, if you sent a scientist, what did this scientist come back and tell you about the energy that it used to get started, or did it keep going perpetually, or give me some idea of what we're talking about.
This particular device requires a small energy input to get started.
Okay.
But once it is up and running, it's a solid-state device, and once it is up and running, it continues to churn out small levels of energy of the order of several hundred watts.
Oh.
But it is deemed to be scalable, and in time, the inventor predicts that increasing levels of output will be there. So.
So he's basically talking about an invention he became aware of at that time. I don't know the specific device that he was referring to then, but typically what he went on to describe was the way that these devices work. A lot of them involve high-speed rotation, we already mentioned that with the hydrosonic pump, or high-frequency changes in either magnetic fields, electric current, or electric fields. Those are also common characteristics. Now we're going to look at some of the techniques and devices that have basically been developed that I've come across over the last few years. That I've come across them. There have been a number of reproductions of some of Nikola Tesla's experiments, and there are quite a few. Again, just go onto YouTube and you can find these things. They've reproduced the wireless transmission of power technology that Tesla has done. And what I've got here is a video of that this guy's actually able to illuminate a bulb underwater. I'm just going to show you the video. It's not in of itself free energy, but this whole idea of wirelessly transmitting power in and of itself is, you barely come across it.
Good afternoon. I'm going to show you a few things that Tesla has sent to us many years ago. Out of his lectures, books, on page 134, figure 19, you'll see the circuit right here. And also the same circuit can be found in his book, The Innovations, Research and Writings of Nikola Tesla. In this book here, it's found in several places. The one we're going to be demonstrating today will be on figure 183. Also, I've gained some of this information from Jerry Vassalato's book, Lost Science, and his other book, Secrets of Cold War Technology. Both are invaluable. Here you'll see my setup. It's 2 copper rods connected across the top with another copper rod that is on a slidable scale. I can slide it up and down. I have lowered it from the higher position today just so you can see it on the film. My camera's not quite tall enough to catch the whole thing, but it's slides up and down. It's just 2 parallel bars of copper. At the bottom of there's capacitors, just like he says in his book, and the spark gap in the front here, powered by a 10,000 volt transformer at the back. And I'll be connecting light bulbs across the bars on these 2 slidable points, both of which are independently slidable. All light bulbs are 110 volt bulbs. The only little bulb will be this bulb right here, which is a 12 volt light bulb. That's for out of an automobile type bulb. And this fluorescent tube here, I don't think it has a voltage rating on it. And we also have this big fluorescent tube over here. So I'll turn the machine on now. Arc is quite loud, so I won't be talking during this part of the demonstration.
So you can already see we've got a different type of technology at work there from what we use normally. Okay, the next person I mentioned before, Wilhelm Reich, he was sort of doing stuff in the 40s, 50s and 60s mainly. He discovered a form of energy called orgone, which I've talked about before briefly. And he claimed that it was the energy from which everything else was made. This could be another version of etheric energy, zero-point energy, vacuum energy. Reich also studied this energy in relation to human sexuality. That's how he discovered it, how he discovered this energy. And he came into this because he worked as a research assistant for Sigmund Freud. So this, you know, this guy was well known. And Reich constructed and conducted experiments with orgone accumulators. So again, it's alternative energy stuff. And I'm not going to read out all the text. I'm just going to skip to the clip of Dr. Eugene Malov, who we'll talk a bit more about in a bit, and what he said about Reich.
Wilhelm Reich, a brilliant man that he was, an unusual man, because remember, he did come out of a sexual psychiatric orientation, right? With
yes.
Sigmund Freud. So who is some person like that to say anything about physics?
Right.
Well,
right.
In 1941, the brilliant fellow that he was, he brought some interesting observations to Einstein. He actually had 4.5 hours with Einstein. And by the way, this meeting is virtually absent from all accounts of the biography of Einstein.
Why? Because of what happened to
Reich was later disparaged. He died in prison, remember?
Yeah, okay.
He turned into, just like cold fusion, an insane pathological man.
Do you think Einstein took some ideas from him?
No, not at all.
Okay.
Einstein, he asked Professor Einstein, a colleague, of course, in the fight against fascism. Remember, this was early 1941, before the United States got into the war.
Right.
But, of course, both of them were opposed to the Nazis, obviously, and
well aware of what was
well
going on.
aware of the possibility. So Einstein, to his credit, felt that all possibilities should be explored in the possible quest to find ways to deal with perhaps war technology and what have you. You know, his letter later on to President Roosevelt obviously helped the Manhattan Project get going.
Mm-hmm.
But here was Reich showing him a simple experiment whereby a mercury thermometer, very accurate mercury thermometer, on the surface of what we call a Faraday cage, a steel enclosure, was higher and remained higher throughout the day than a similar mercury thermometer suspended in air. Okay, now this sounds, your listeners even who don't know about this may say, well, that sounds crazy. What could that possibly show?